Okay, so we are ready to go. Welcome back, guys. Welcome to 2022, and it's great to see you both again. Tim and Giles from Squadrato.
Johnny,
Hello.
good to see you. How are you?
Very, very good, thank you. So, Giles, I'm assuming good Christmas, and sounds like a fairly busy start to 2022 for you.
Very much so. I think the whole of 2021, whilst we were going through all sorts of variety of different changes, I could say post-pandemic, I suppose. We're still obviously in some current restrictions, but I think throughout all of last year, we were talking with organisations, helping organisations who were seeing the customers they were working with wanting to do bigger things when it came to recruiting talent. There was spikes in demand across most sectors, and where Squadrato was always looking to help was to help these recruitment organisations who have customers coming to them saying, we're struggling to hire talent. How do we do it in a different and a better way? And I think there was a mix of those organisations that were, yes, we want the press ahead with the kind of help you can give us, developing annuity services, creating products and services like RPO capability or MSP or statement of work capability. Some were having live conversations with customers that needed something done really quite quickly. And others were, well, we're that busy with that much work on at the moment, just transactional recruitment. We know we might want to do something, but we're going to park it because for the time being, we just need to cope with demand. And that's an interesting kind of dynamic, because there's no doubt lots of the recruitment businesses we've engaged with have certainly seen huge spike in demand and just want to focus on the very much here and now. And I think it's something we'll come on to later. But for Tim and I, it's helped us sort of understand a lot of the sentiment from the recruitment businesses as to where they see themselves going longer term, how we've throughout our time as Squadrato have helped businesses develop those kinds of services that have seen reward come quite quickly because the demand's been there from the customers. It's not been a concept that hasn't actually seen something realized quite quickly. Whereas others are sort of saying, yeah, we know we've got a journey to go on, but right now we're just going to focus on the here and now and the today. So I think that's helped from our perspective, because it's helped us sort of see where customers might end up going over the course of the next sort of 24 months or so. And whilst the market then continues to sort of wax and wane with significant spike in demand and some of the things that we'll come on to, I'm sure, when it looks at things like IR35 and what might happen with that over the course of the next 12 months. So yeah, it's been brilliant end to the year and a very interesting start to this year as well.
Definitely a very interesting start. The other thing about particularly the first quarter of last year is that we also helped a couple of end user organisations with the conundrum of organising IR35, assessing their non-permanent labour, their off-payroll labour, and helping them put solutions in with some recruitment partners as well about how to manage that and get them across that hump of April last year. So that was interesting as well.
Yeah.
Well, if I think back to when we last spoke, we last got together in this format back in November 2020. Great. So obviously quite a lot of water's gone under the bridge since then. Obviously, you say IR35 coming in and all of the kind of fallout from that. So Tim, what's been the focus? Giles, that's really interesting to recap on some of the stuff you guys have been doing over the last year, which gives it gives a good reminder as well as where your areas of expertise are for you guys in terms of helping recruitment companies build up these annuity services and to a certain extent move up the value chain. Tim, how have you seen that operate in the last year, bearing in mind the backdrop of IR35, and also bearing in mind when a recruitment company's busy and they've just got a huge, massive amount of demand that they can't possibly hope to fulfill. There are candidate shortages, there are skill shortages. It's quite difficult for them to prioritize the strategic stuff as well, isn't it?
Definitely. It's a massive distraction because the bright, shiny thing's in front of you. I think it's I don't think it's that inaccurate to say all the staffing businesses that we've worked with, all the recruiters that we've worked with in the last 12 months have had the best year they've ever had financially from a revenues perspective. But I think, and this will chime with recruiters who are listening to this, one of the challenges is you might have loads and loads of jobs, but which ones are the best ones to fill? And you're increasingly seeing, the agency market wanting to move to commitment from clients to work with them. So be that, wanting to do some sort of retained agreements and retained work financially, be that trying to close the customer down. I think, I think one of the things I've really noticed is, particularly sitting on sales floors like I was yesterday, in a recruitment sales floor yesterday, is actually seeing that the recruitment consultants, some of them for the first time, because this hasn't been the market for the last 5 to 10 years, are having to really really close down customers to the process to make sure that they're not wasting their time on a job that the customer's not committed to, or the customer is offering the right value benefits to attract the right candidates, that the role is fillable. So a lot of recruitment owners in their transactional business are struggling with, we've got loads and loads of jobs on, but are we actually filling any more as a percentage than we were before? Let's focus on the quote quality business. Let's improve the quality that we've got. And I think that naturally, in our world, in our lingua franca, would naturally lead us to, well, if you want to build trust with the customer, there's a deeper relationship that you can develop with them that will get them to where they need to be. But I've also experienced, I think we've both experienced, and this is another kind of quite unusual conversation to hear, is recruiters on the desks actually having to deal with buybacks on a regular basis, on salary inflation.
When you say buybacks, do you mean counter offers?
Counter offers,
right?
Salary inflation, having to have, sometimes for the first time in their career, talk to customers about the fact that their salaries are not where the market is at, because it's changing so quickly.
Yeah.
And that's not been seen for a long time, particularly in the, our client base is specifically within professional services sectors, tech, digital engineering, infrastructure engineering. Those are the staffing businesses that we work with. Their specialisms tend to be in that area, and it's something that a cohort of recruiters has not seen in the way that it's happened in the last 12 months. So it's a function of huge amounts of demand out there, and I think that should prompt the recruiters and also end clients to try and take a step back and think about, there needs to be a more strategic way in which you go about acquiring talent. There's more to this than just having to go out there and attract talent with 10, 15, 20% pay increases, which is not unusual at the moment, that people are being moved for that sort of money.
That's true with perm as it is with non-perm and off payroll workers as well, freelancers. One of the stats are there's sort of 60% of businesses surveyed have had to pay more than that. 3/4 of businesses surveyed, and I think a recent Brooks and legal survey, they've had to increase rates. I think if you sort of chuck that into the mix of, many organizations have now just embraced hybrid working. So where the talent pool sits is another conundrum. What type of team structure needs to be in place, because half the team won't ever necessarily meet themselves face to face. When you've also got to consider that then throws the capture of talent across a far broader spectrum, and increasingly, as I think we talked about last time, people's work-life balance is now at the top of a lot of candidate pools lists of things that are critical to them taking the next job. So lots of different things that are are impacting how recruitment organisations service customers and customer demand. But all of that talks, for me, says more control is needed, more order is needed, more structure is needed, rather than we need to go to a wider community of suppliers. We need to engage more people. It's sort of the less is more result, I think, is probably.
And I think we're going to. I think we're going to move on to this, but I think the COVID has just amplified some things that were already structurally in play, and coming down the line, and I think it's just accelerated and amplified some of these challenges. The causes that we're talking about. The result is that there's a huge labour shortage across almost every sector. There's a huge labour shortage.
So when we're talking about this kind of the clear and present problem of, for a recruitment organisation, I've got all these jobs to fill. Same problem from an end organisation. We're under resourced. We've got skill shortages. It feels to me like you can get too focused on. I mean, it's clearly an opportunity for recruitment businesses, and it's clearly a problem for companies. Well, it's a problem for everybody, really. But I think you can see how people could get stuck kind of spinning their wheels on that, in the sense that, retention's important. If it's really difficult to hire people, make sure you're not losing good people. Make sure you're looking after people you got, paying the right amounts, looking after people, allowing people to work in a way that makes your company, this opportunity, the best thing for you. But there's also the wider view of talent, and effectively this wider view of resource capacity, which is where it starts to go into other models. How could you resource this requirement? Are you effectively utilizing internal resource? Are you giving them opportunities to get involved on a project basis on exciting things? Are you effectively pushing out to contingent workforce, or are you effectively hiring, or are you effectively outsourcing where that's appropriate? So I think the ability to take that more holistic view, as you say, it's not just a question of more volume. It's a question of quality and strategic thinking that is ultimately going to lead companies to be very successful in the future, because this is one of the major challenges for organizations at the moment, and is likely to be, it always is, but it's very much at the fore at the moment. Oh, sorry, Tim, you're on mute.
Definitely. Sorry, I'm on mute. Just trying to protect everyone from the dogs yowling for a little bit. Yeah, I think planning is always a challenge. It's very difficult to plan, and at the moment, in normal times, it's difficult to plan what you're going to need in 6 months' time. But at the moment, the last 18 months or so has been almost impossible for organisations to do that. And I think when you start to try and take a step back and look at where the available talent pools are, and also embrace, and I think this is something that the lens of IR35 has drawn focus onto organisations about how they use non-permanent labour. That the outcome that they need doesn't necessarily lead to the fact that they need to make a permanent hire, that there are ways in which they can deliver the outcome that they require without having to increase the number of employees that they have. And it's a shift in mindset and strategy to start to think about what it is that we want to achieve, and then look at all of the ways in which we could achieve that by blending all of the channels that are available to us. I think when you're and this is true, when you're in the moment, you're just dealing with a massive in tray, and you're just dealing with all of the shouting that we've got loads of orders, and we need to try and find a way of filling them. Let's go to the way in which we filled them before, rather than thinking about all of the different ways in which you that might be possible out there to fill them. So there's an education and a change mindset that I think everybody's having to go through quite rapidly at the moment, to think about ways in which they can achieve those things.
Do you think it's flowing up as well as down, in the sense that some clients are being educated and driving this through their recruitment partners, but in some cases the forward-thinking recruitment partners are driving this agenda, where they're saying, look, there are other things we can do. We can help you on a wider basis. You may have us slotted in here, but we can actually do these other things for you and address this broadly
as well. The one that the example that's been in the news very much in the last half of 2020 was the HGV driver shortage, and the solutions that had to be put in place quite rapidly to try and solve that. None of them were short-term fixes. There was a fundamental challenge in training enough individuals and a timeline that would be required to train those individuals. I think everybody would agree that we want HGV drivers trained properly, but when you listened to the causes of that squeeze in HGV drivers, it dates back years. It dates back to, the conditions, the pay, obviously, but the conditions that HGV drivers have to put up with, what they're expected to do. It's just not an attractive thing to do. And when you've got a tight labour market, just from a macro metric level, there are physically a fixed number of people to do all the jobs there are in the UK. You have to have some long-term thinking around it, and that meant that government had to get involved. That meant that training organisations had to get involved. That meant that third-party recruiters had to get involved in the solution. And certainly, when you talk about the global recruitment companies, their strategies are holistic around nurturing of talent all the way through the required skill shortages and sectors to be able to fulfill the needs that are coming down the line. But there's some it's not a simple answer. It does take people to take a step back and understand how they're going to go about doing it. And the supermarkets, for example, we've all been to a supermarket in the last 6 months, seen the pictures up there about becoming an HGV driver. They've had to pay more money. They've had to increase the wages, but they also, if you notice the small print, are offering training bursaries. They're offering all sorts of different incentives to try and attract talent into that ecosystem. So, and you could say that, you could use, that's just an example, but I think it does need that change mindset, and it does need that stepping back for an organisation, for an end client organisation, to try and think strategically about what their needs are going to be, and the different ways in which they can fulfil those needs, both in the short term but also in the medium and long term.
I think there are some things around, again, the lens of IR35 and the talk of, consider, jumping ahead to what we might come on to, but the government said there's a kind of a soft landing now for IR35, wasn't there, for the first 12 months or so. So organisations who made very quick decisions at sort of 2020, Christmas 2020, to say, right, we're banning off payroll workers, there won't be any. Are they now successfully delivering what they need to deliver, so the best part of 16 months on or 15 months on? Or are they now thinking, actually, we need to flip back because we're just not being able to achieve what we need to achieve now that there's a burst in demand and burst in capacity, and that means we need to reconsider how, what a flexible workforce looks like. And I think it's going to be interesting to see whether post sort of April, as things do start to get maybe a bit more serious around HMRC looking at IR35 within organisations and how it's been implemented, as to whether there's a further tightening of those opportunities that sit within an outside determination. Organisations do get far more nervous about doing it, and then that puts an even more, going back to Tim's point, that you've got to have a blended approach to thinking about outcomes. It's got to be an outcome conversation. And I think you're right, Johnny. I think there is some, as I said at the outset, we've got organisations who are going proactively to customers to say, you need to change the way you're doing it, but then also customers coming to the organisations themselves and saying, you need to help us do recruitment better. We're making an absolute rickets of it. I think that there's also an interesting piece that we've seen, Tim, and correct me if I'm wrong, but certainly the smaller to medium-sized recruitment businesses have been drawn to Europe and the States as well. That they're almost, whether it's consciously finding some UK recruitment challenges in, as we were saying, just too difficult to do. There's still too much inconsistency from the customer or the support process, or they've got different wrong kind of model in play and it's difficult to work with, but are being drawn to servicing opportunities in Germany or the Nordics or even into the States. There's quite a few of the businesses we've worked with that are getting very excited about the amount of demand that exists outside of the UK. And so there's a kind of almost a lack of, the UK will potentially lose a lack of capability from some of these organizations who are now starting to focus on less mature markets, or markets that are maybe more open to listening to change.
Yeah,
different ways.
I think that's also a function of, you know, the challenges that we have in the UK are replicated in other high income countries across the globe as well. And I think we probably need to be aware that I think the clients, the recruiters that we work with, are dealing in high knowledge professional services areas, so that there's a ready market out there to do some things differently, and that their clients are leading them there as well. I think we both talk to recruitment owners who are distracted by that shiny thing, to try and to get them to come back to, there's more you can do with your existing customers. There's more you can do with the way in which you interact with your existing customers. Fundamentally, there's more you can do to increase your fill rates with those existing customers.
And it comes back to the recruitment organizations have an opportunity to address this on a wider basis, and companies do as well. And it's likely that both parties are going to have to do that to evolve successfully, because, you know, what we're you know, the subjects we're looking to talk about today are looking at the skill shortages versus the ways that you can be more flexible in your workforce approach. And for me, that's just the everyday for me, because I've had exposure across, you know, the kind of permanent recruitment world, job boards, all sorts of technology, marketplaces, the gig economy, contingent workforce, etc., and obviously services procurement as well. So I look at it on that, you know, I don't have any restrictions of, I sit in this department, so I've got to be focused on this particular area, and those people over there that I don't really talk to are dealing with that side of it. I just look at the whole thing. And I think if you take a kind of C-suite point of view from an organization, I've said this many times, when it comes to resource and capacity, they're just interested in understanding what is the most effective use of our resources. They've got various different channels that they can use to get things done. They need to have that resilience within their workforce supply chain, if you want to put it like that. So they need to have different ways of getting things done, and they need to use the most appropriate way for the thing that they need to get done. So again, comes down to outputs, outcomes, and designing things around the work, not necessarily trying to design things around the worker. But the other side of it is all the social change, all the things that have happened to people, not just over the last 2 years, but over the last 10, 15 years. Tim, we've previously started talking about some of the kind of macroeconomic factors that sit in the background. I think Giles described them as the boring but interesting bits that he was like, Tim can talk about those bits.
Very good.
Well, you know, it's graphs, but it's also that annoying thing of data. You know, I think we've all become very familiar with looking at graphs and next slide bits and, you know, percentages and all the rest of it. But there's a fundamental shift in the population in this country that dates back. So if we go back to the sort of 80s, when we were at school, Johnny, and Giles was just starting work, I think, in the late 80s.
Fax machines, as I remember.
Machines, all of those sorts of things. Roughly in the 80s and before that, you know, that there was roughly the 80s and 90s. Up until that point, you had roughly 2 people in their 20s entering the labour market for every 1 person in their 60s leaving the labour market. And our experience, R3's experience is, and our generation's experience is that the size of the labour market increased. There were more people coming into the labour market than leaving it. Since the beginning of the 2010s, that's changed. Today, it's about the same number entering the labour market as leaving the labour market. So roughly, it's and in fact it's slightly less. The number of people available, coming into the market, it's actually on the point of declining. And that's a function of huge social change in the last 30 or 40 years. It's a function of technology enabling different things, but the fundamentals of any population are the birth rate. And the birth rate in this country has come down. We're not producing loads of people. Now, since the 2000s, we have been backfilling that with immigration. And that's fine, but we've seen that isn't fine for everybody. A lot of people, find that as a negative. Some people find that as a positive. It causes friction within a population. And, you could say that the Brexit vote was a reaction to that. But whatever the reason, that we've turned the tap off. And you could argue that you can't continue just to import hundreds of thousands of people, to fill the labour gap. I mean, it's not really sustainable. Frankly, the only sustainable solution is we'll have more children. But
I can't handle any more. I've got no more for me.
we in the higher income countries in Europe and in the States, we live in old societies. Africa
getting older and will continue to be the trend, won't it?
Getting older, and you only have to look at Japan, which has chosen not to allow immigration, has a small birth rate, and their economy has plateaued for the last 25 years because the economy can't grow because there's physically not enough people. So back to the UK, before Brexit, in the years before Brexit, I remember having a conversation with some people around a pub conversation with some people around this who weren't, and I brought up a graph of, so the context of the conversation was, you see, migration, it's taking everyone's jobs. It's taking people's jobs, it's taking British jobs away from British people. If you look at the unemployment rate since 2010, the unemployment rate was at times at its lowest that it's ever been recorded. So the number of people out of work was at its lowest, where we had the most amount of immigration happening, because there were loads of jobs. We've just in the last 18 months, 3 years since Brexit, we have disincentivized migration from Europe. It's still possible, but we've massively disincentivized it. We haven't, through government policy, turned on the taps from other territories to bring in migratory labour. Although, there are some key exceptions to that. But all of a sudden, the UK is not the place to be able to go and to come from abroad to find a job. And we just don't have enough people to do all the jobs that need to be done. And the effect of the interventions around lockdowns, constraining the economy massively, pumping loads of money into the economy to, quote, support it, which sits on personal bank accounts and corporate bank accounts, that's all ready to be spent. And all of a sudden, we've got what's been described by people much more eminently qualified in economics than us, of this ketchup bottle effect, ketchup bottle economy, where you're banging that you've got a huge amount of pent-up demand in the ketchup bottle, and you're banging it to try and get it out. And all of a sudden, it's going to come out all at the same time, and there's going to be huge constraints in being able to deliver all of that growth. And principally, that comes down to the number of people who can do all the jobs that are available to deliver all of those orders and spend all of that money. And that's leading to inflation. It will just lead to inflation. The wages are on the rise. They're continuing to be on the rise because there are just physically the numbers don't add up. So think it's always a challenge to realize that the world has changed from what you thought it was like, particularly when you 10 or 20 years ago. But there just isn't going to be the same amount of people coming into the labour market. So you've got to do something different to drive economic growth. You've either got to import that labour, you've got to automate the tasks that they do, or from a macro perspective, there are very few big things you can do to change that, other than creating more people to come into the economy. So talking about it from a macro perspective, as I was telling you about the experience of recruiters that we're seeing at desks at the moment, those in their 20s and late 20s and 30s, they've never had to deal with wage inflation. They've not really had to talk to their customers very often when they're taking a job from them to go, your salary is completely off where the market is at the moment. We've had this on a couple of occasions, particularly during the summer, where they've just never had to have that conversation. When it was a different matter in the 90s, when Giles and I were on the tools and stuff. There was technology was moving on at a pace, and there was different things, but it's realizing that this is a long-term structural trend in the UK labour market that's not going to go away. That there's big strategic long-term decisions that certain sectors have got to make about how they're going to physically get the number of people to deliver those things. For example, there's a massive shortage of midwives at the moment. Now, obviously, with a declining birth rate, you would expect that you need less midwives, but attracting people into that profession means they're not going to do other things. Getting people to become HGV drivers means there's no one going to be able to pack the shelves, or no one to drive the vans, or no one to do this. There's a real constraint on the labour market at the moment, which is because of the birth rate in this country across all sectors, all population types, all regions, all ethnicities, backgrounds, whatever way you segment it, the birth rate's going like that and plateauing to roughly below 2 on average.
Yeah,
across the piece, and there's just not enough people around. So with that in mind, that's the way I would want to behave, or have that at the back of my mind when I'm talking to a customer about the reason why, a customer about the challenges they're having finding the right talent, and how they're going to go about attracting the right talent. If you're as we've been saying, recruiters have had financially some of the best years some of them have had they've ever had in their history. And the sector in recruitment has had even better than that. That's recruitment to recruitment agencies.
Yeah.
They've gone nuts. And the biggest, one of the constant conversations we have with our recruitment clients is, I can't find enough people to fill all the jobs I've got. I've just had such and such a person poached to go and work for yesterday was talking to one of our customers who's had a very senior talent partner poached by a big six systems integrator. They've doubled their salary. They have doubled their salary. So that this isn't going to go away, but there's a real opportunity to be able to, for recruiters to deepen their relationships with customers, to provide much more control and governance. We were talking earlier, Johnny, you were talking earlier about talking to a number of different functions within an organization. Many organizations do have a view of what their workforce looks like, or even have a workforce plan, but in our experience, it's by far it's not the majority. Even large organizations of repute that you would have heard of will not have a single version of how many non-permanent workers they've got in this organization, how many permanent workers they've got in this association, or what the demand might look like in 3 months' time for those workers.
And an equally fragmented way of saying, if we do have demand, this is the way that we go and fulfill it. We feel we need to reach out to this challenging market, the only way we can do that is through multiple supply, is by throwing the net as wide as possible in order to
talking to as many agencies as we can, sending them all the same job spec. That's how we go about. Oh, God, and what, we need 10 more tomorrow? Oh God.
We'll go to a different 10, because that first 10, they're already looking at the stuff that we gave them yesterday, which again is totally unsustainable. And so tapping into then, what is the talent pool you want to address? What are the types of people you want to have working in the organization? Talks to lots of things around ensuring you have the right proposition, the right kind of experience, you take people through the right journey, you're giving them the right environment to thrive and succeed and to grow and develop, and to tell other people that this is a great place to come and work. Comes back to this point around control, about control of that message, control of that proposition, control of that activity, to capture and attract what talent is available or could be available within a planned approach of thinking about outcomes. And, you know, as we've said, on a blended approach is always going to be the most appropriate way of doing it. But recruiters are going to find the definition of madness of doing the same thing again, expecting a different result. They might say, well, all we need to do is do what we did in 2021, and 2022 is going to be bumper. But the same point you come back to is, the way you do that is you get more people in. So where are all these people coming from to help you deliver to that increased demand again? It's got to flip, as Tim's saying, it's got to flip from building the capability in the organization just to do more from a volume perspective, to look at it from the customer's end, to look at it from the customer side, and to get that customer engagement right, that customer commitment right. We were saying that from the outset, you know, getting that control, getting that partnership in place, rather than it being just wanting to do more transactions, because that's going to be unsustainable throughout the course of this year, I think.
So, and I think, you know, in the context of the background of, look, there is going to be a labour shortage for the foreseeable future. I think I was listening to one of Gary Goldsmith's Pirates podcasts on LinkedIn. So don't just believe me, listen to Mr. Goldsmith. You know, built one of the largest recruitment businesses in the UK, part of the team that founded S3. This is a direct quote, but apologies, Gary, if I'm mangling your words. If I was setting up a recruitment business today, I wouldn't set up a transactional recruitment business. I'd set up a recruitment business that does recruitment as a service, RPO and MSP, because that is what is going to succeed for customers. That is what's going to succeed for customers. That is the way in which customers will need to operate in a more holistic way. They're just going to have to. That is the future. That's how it's going to have to be done.
Well, it's the application of logic in the face of the fact, really, isn't it? Because and just starting to have some consciousness about how you go about acquiring talent, and have some rigor around it, and some joined up thinking, and some governance, and a process, and a way of doing it, and some sight of how you do it, and some intelligence about how you do it, and some technology that enables you to do that more efficiently, like Zivio, for example. That surely has to be the better solution than just doing what we've been doing before.
But if it's not already at C-suite level as agenda point 1 or 2, which it should be, is that it should be how are we going to acquire the resource, or how are we going to deploy the resource to achieve what we need to achieve? And if they're not at that level, because so often, as I think we said before on this session last time, you know, recruitment is not seen as the single most important topic, certainly within a people environment, but it sits sometimes uncomfortably within the HR community. Sometimes it's not thought of as being needing the attention. It's got a quick fix answer by, you know, bringing some people internally to handle recruitment, without thinking more fundamentally, as we've said throughout this session, what are we trying to achieve? What are the outcomes are we trying to achieve? Because it isn't just about acquiring new, it's about retaining the existing, of course. I'm working with an organization at the moment who have, I suppose they're in a sector that's largely recession proof, so it's in the kind of utility sector, and they've embarked on a project to hire around about 100 or so people into technology over the course of the next sort of 4 or 5 months or so. And part of that has been acquiring new from external, of course, but they've been very, very keen to ensure that there's internal mobility. And if the number of roles have been filled so far, half have come from internal moves. Some of those within the technology department, but also outside and other outlying core business streams. So the answer to fulfilling demand in an organization has got to be thought of, as we've said, from a broader perspective, rather than right, how many do we need today? Because that's just not going to cut it, as we keep saying. But the great thing is there is an answer to this. There are things to do from both a recruitment capability, as Tim's just said, around, if you're going to do it now, you would have annuity services as part of the things that you can offer your customer. But you can advise the customer, you can tell the customer, you can show and evidence the customer there's a better way to do things, a different way to do things. Everything that was happening before the pandemic, during the pandemic, can't be fit for purpose now. It just doesn't add up that it is. So if there's one message, go back, consider what those outcomes need to be, and be open to a different way of approaching how talent can be acquired.
Yeah, I think it's some great points. I think just to come back to one other thing is, you're talking about outcomes. What are the desired outcomes? That fundamentally ties into overall business strategy, how effectively that's communicated, how line managers understand their own responsibility as a part of that overall strategy. And I think if you look within the kind of annuity services that recruitment companies can progress to, that can evolve to that can take on to broaden the partnership that they have with an end customer, there are various ways that they can help with those outcomes. You mentioned RPO, you mentioned MSP, a more joined up approach to managing this permanent and flexible workforce. From our point of view, obviously with a focus on services procurement, the output-based statement of work, we're also seeing that those annuity services expand into the provision of truly outcome-based project and consulting services that recruitment companies are able to provide, that are of huge benefit to customers, where you've got this kind of merging of the management consulting world and the staffing world, where you've got management consulting firms starting to act a lot like recruitment companies in some ways to fulfill the work they're doing, particularly obviously very relevant to what the professional services areas you guys are looking at, and also staffing businesses starting to act more like management consultancies and move up the value chain in that way. How do you guys think, and I'll put this one to Tim first, how do you guys think this has been and is likely to be affected by IR35?
Well, can I just sort of make a comment on what you said before about management consulting businesses? Large management consulting businesses, I've not come across a single one of the big six that doesn't have a rate card for any of their consultants.
Yeah.
So I'd say they're more like recruiting businesses than we give them credit for. I think the impact of IR35 has definitely been to provide that lens on, hang on a second, who have we got who's not on our payroll in our business, which many organisations didn't have a clear view on 3 or 4 years ago. I think that there's been a reaction which has probably been twofold in where we're seeing it at the moment, where we are today. I think you've got certainly the FTSE 250 organisations, being very compliant in the way that they adhere to the legislation, and have essentially got outsourced permanent workers doing non-permanent work. So they're compensating them and compensating them in that way. So they've essentially just paid the extra tax. I think there's other organisations that, as part of that, are probably probably willing to accept a bit more risk around what work is inside or outside of R35. But I think within that, there have been organisations as part of that process of looking at what their non-permanent workers are actually doing, what the value and output they're actually providing. We've come to the conclusion that actually there's a better way of doing this. There's a more a more correct way in which we can use that resource to get better value and better outcomes from what they're doing by considering more closely how we manage what their outputs are rather than manage the heads. And this is, we've worked with, I was going to say, well, there's 3 customers particularly that come to mind who we have worked with to help them build projects through recruitment businesses, sorry, I should say, to help them build projects or statements of work, services and solutions. Giles and I have also done this years ago before IR35 actually, because it was actually the best solution for the organisation. There was an obvious way in which they could secure the talent. That was interestingly driven by the customer having a concern that they weren't going to have access to some very specific skills in a very business critical in a very business critical function, and they wanted a way of ensuring that they had a risk-free way of having continual access to those skills, but in a way that they could call on them in a way that fitted with their demand much more than having them sitting on the bench doing nothing sometimes. So when those organisations that have looked at that, they may have come to that solution as a result of the prompt of IR35. They may come to that conclusion, and I think it's probably fair to say most organisations have come to that conclusion because they've had to inspect how they use non-permanent labour or off-payroll labour. But then there are clear circumstances where the best way of utilising that talent is to concentrate on what their outcome is to manage them by the outcome, manage that talent pool by the outcome that you want, rather than the time or head that you want sitting on a seat somewhere in an office. I'm speculating here, but I think possibly people are much more comfortable now because of the pandemic about not being so presenteeism is not such a big thing as it was, and people are much more used to thinking about outcomes of what people are doing. But there are challenges for a traditional transactional recruiter being able to run those services. There are fundamentally different things that they need to acquire the expertise in.
Oh, for sure.
To be able to make those things work. And I think from a customer's perspective, from an end user's perspective as well, that there's also a journey that they need to go on to be really clear about that being the right solution for the particular circumstance.
It takes investment on both sides.
Yeah, definitely.
Completely.
But as I say, we can reel off a number of organisations where that is happening and it has worked. And some of them it needs maturing. Some of them has been a bit bumpy along the way. There's other organisations that we've touched as well that are finding it quite challenging to do. Other recruiters that are finding it quite challenging to do because there's some challenges around it. But it's no doubt, if it's positioned with the customer, the end users in the right way, and then the circumstances are right, that it is just a better way of doing it. It fits more with the need of the business.
I think what we've seen is where there isn't a clarity on what kind of problem and task it's looking to solve and achieve, what kind of solution and service and outcome is it looking to provide and support. And I think the delving into the detail of some of the customer engagements will be, well, we're not quite sure we're doing what we originally said we were going to do, and the customer's not quite sure they've actually got what they thought they'd bought in the first place. And I think a lot of it's still got to be, comes back to, as Tim says, very much a clear determination of what outcome is looking to be achieved. And then, the gap for the organisation providing is this well, how do we acquire some of that capability to become more service and outcome based, which, you know, by its nature is something that is an ongoing rather than just a, you know, reward, rather than just the gratification of a single transaction, a single placement or a single hire. But the disciplines of delivering these things are very much around partnering, coming back to what we've been saying around partnering with an organization to help them achieve some longer term goals, to get embedded delivering these kind of statement of work solutions, start to get you a seat at the table where you can help influence the wider talent challenge, and, you know, upselling these kinds of services into different kind of talent acquisition models becomes far easier. And, you know, whilst I was saying earlier, you know, people have got bright and shiny ideas about going to deliver in Germany or the States or wherever else. You know, if we've said all along, customers, the recruitment businesses have already got that's the most sensible thing anybody's said so far on this conversation.
The dog timer has just gone off. The dog is like, wrap it up, guys. Well, listen, Tim has just disappeared from video, but hopefully he will be back in a second. But
you've got to keep that in.
Yeah, that's staying in 100%. We'll put in an avatar of Tim for the last bit.
Fantastic.
It's super interesting. You guys are going to be very busy, and I think, you know, when you again with the R35 lens, you know, companies had the knee jerk. They had to worry about the here and now. It's a year down the line. It's going to be a year down the line soon. Some stuff won't have been done. Capacity's under threat. You've got all these skill shortages. It feels like chaos, but that's where everybody's got to get organized, and that's what's going to keep you guys super busy. It's going to keep us super busy, and I think it's a great opportunity for organizations and recruitment businesses to just work more closely together and basically get more value out of each other.
No question. The opportunity the I suppose the opportunity is to be opportunistic and proactive now. Is to start to have these conversations now. You know, the run up to the end of April 22 onwards, when we see the kind of the wash of, okay, right, we've been doing this for a year now. Where is the risk? You know, they shouldn't be having that conversation in April. We should be having that conversation now. They should be going back to first principles around. We were really good at finding out who we had in the organisation this time last year. Are we still looking at it with such, you know, laser focus, or have a few slipped in around the corner? So I think if you're going to start to have those conversations again, a health check, you know, check and balance, you know, objective independent review, all those sorts of things help organizations ensure they're now geared up to be fit for purpose from April onwards. I think is all very valid. But again, through the lens of, you know, when it's come down to it, organizations have just paid more to keep the top talent, you know, so rates have gone up to keep both inside workers engaged, but also, you know, there's still been plenty of outside IR35 determinations to keep people excited. So it's going to go through another period of kind of reassessment, a realignment, and that's just going to provide opportunity for recruitment organizations to help. You know what? You put off doing anything fundamentally different about managing your off-payroll workers. Surely now's the time to get that control absolutely right, given the demand that's going to come or is coming now, to bring in better people and churn the quality and all of that good stuff that comes from it.
Brilliant stuff. Great. Well, thanks, guys. Really appreciate your time. Some cracking input there. Really enjoyed that. Tim, I'm assuming you had to go off camera there for a minute to just sit your dog down and say, have we spoken about this? When I'm on a call, you keep the barking to a minimum.
Well, we just agreed, actually, Tim, for the next one that the dog's going to have a leading role, because I think they came up with some brilliant points there.
Yeah, Oliver Mabel style Zoom call, definitely.
Very good.
Quality. All right, guys. Well, listen.
Thanks for that.
Thanks very much for your time. Great to see you both. Take it easy.
All the best.
Bye.
Cheers. Cheers.